Selamat malam kawan-kawan. Welcome to this forum titled Multiculturalism Rhetorics. It's a question mark, huh? Is it a breeding ground for racism? We're very happy that we have enough experts in the hall. I see Dr. KJ John and many others, Paul Sinapan here, who know a lot about these issues over the years of activism. So we have a small crowd and there'll be enough space for us to discuss. But before I go on any further, we've organized this in conjunction with a visit by a United Nations colleague who has a title called the UN Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerances. So let's give a warm welcome for Dr. Mutuma Rutere. He comes from Kenya, and he says he already feels at home in Malaysia because all our stories are the same stories he's gone through for years struggling there. So you can ask him what is it that makes us so similar. But I think there are some changes in Kenya that I hope he will also share with us how they got through these challenges. For some of you, you may not be so familiar with the word UN. I think all of us are familiar, but Special Rapporteur. In the UN, there is so many bodies in the UN, so many groups, and one of it is called the Human Rights Council. The Human Rights Council is a body within the UN that meets 3 times a year, and this body its members are governments, states. So I think there are 47 members now, and one of them is Malaysia, who is a member of the Human Rights Council. What do? Their role is to listen to all the human rights report on different issues around the world, discuss, debate, and come up with suggestions, resolutions that will, sometimes it's directed at the UN to do something, sometimes directed at experts like Mr. Mutuma, sometimes it's for governments, you know, to take up some action. So that's the task of this body. It meets for 4 weeks, 2 weeks in Geneva. And this body, over the years, have also realized that they don't have the expertise on everything in the world. So they have appointed what is called, well, at least elected, what is called an independent expert. So this, our friend Mr. Mutuma Rutere is an example of one of the many independent experts. I think he told us yesterday there's about 43, yeah, of these individuals. These are very important allies in the UN system for us because they specialize on a specific topic and issue and they take it deeper. If anyone should know some of these topics that we are discussing today, it should be the Special Rapporteur. His task and role is to report every year to this body, the Human Rights Council. He also gives a report to the General Assembly in New York, and he can also undertake specialized studies on topics. And the good news is that he can also make official visits to countries. So we are hoping one day in the future, Malaysia will be on that list. This time he is here as a guest, as a resource person. So we invited him to speak at a national conference that we had yesterday on non-discrimination. So he is here, what is termed as an unofficial visit. But for you and I, unofficial, official, it all means the same because he will still be speaking here. Okay? But in governmental terms, it's very important because in an official visit, the government must extend an invitation to Mr. Mutuma. In the last few days, he's met many government people and he's very gently reminded them that I'm ready to come. Maybe you can invite me. So we may have a chance to see him in a few months or maybe next year. But that's a little bit of background of what a Special Rapporteur in the UN is doing. What's the connection with us in Malaysia, with the UN, so far? Well, it's just another tool in our arsenal to use to help our government improve, to help Malaysia improve, using standards that are generally accepted as universal principles in human rights. So that's the discussion today. Mr. Mutuma is very experienced on this topic, and he's going to share with us his office work, his focus area, and maybe some things. He came here on Saturday, first time to Malaysia, first time to Asia. So maybe we should give him another round of applause and welcome him to this continent. Okay. But after 4 days, I think he now has a little bit of knowledge of us, of our country, and maybe he can dialogue and also give some suggestions. So just to let you know that it's a colleague, it's an ally, and we should take that spirit in this discussion. A little bit about him personally, that was his office and his mandate, is that he is the director of the National Policy Study Center, the Policy Study Center of Kenya. It is a think tank research center on human rights issues in Kenya. He's the director. So he's got such a big title, but he's not paid. It's a voluntary position, so he can't be influenced by whoever is paying him a salary. So this mandate is totally voluntary. Yeah? That's why it remains an independent expert title. He also teaches on and off occasionally at the Nairobi University on human rights topics, and he's also involved in many other NGOs. His office has one staff, so that explains, one man handling the whole world with one staff and a lot of will and commitment. So that sounds like many of you who have been in the NGO world for a long time. Yeah. So that's a little bit about Dr. Mutuma Ruture. But we thought it's Malaysia, so we have to have a discussion that also includes our own thinking and voices. So we got Dr. Ahmad Farouk. Let's give him a warm round of applause. Yeah? Chairman and Director of the Islamic Renaissance Front, IRF. It's a very powerful name. You can ask him what they do, what undercover and above. No, it's all above board, okay, don't worry. He's an academician. He's also a cardiothoracic surgeon, okay, now. I know it's something about cardiosurgeon, okay, he's an expert, a medical doctor. He's also on the Bersih 2.0 steering committee and founding member of the Muslim Professionals Forum. He's a human rights personality, He's bringing all aspects of Malaysian world, our culture, religion, and trying to mix that up and come up with a new understanding of what Malaysia should be from a point of culture and religion. And I think his contribution is very important in Malaysia. You and I know why. Because for the longest time, small groups who have access to a lot of media space, extreme views, get that center stage. But sadly, we don't have enough of Dr. Farouks around to balance that view or challenge those notions. But today we'll get a chance to hear that, and that's why we have both of them with us here. The format for today is fairly a straightforward dialogue. Dr. Mutuma will take 15-20 minutes, same with Dr. Farouk, and then I invite you not to just give questions. You can also take the floor to add in your own points. Many of you have been working on this issue for a long time. So please feel free to speak your heart and your mind. This is a safe space. We may have disagreement, that's fine. Malaysia has always had disagreement and we managed. So state your viewpoint, and if you disagree, state that, and that's fine. And we'll continue from then on. Yesterday's national conference was interesting. We had 100 people there. We had about 20 government officials there. We had a government speaker from the Department of National Unity, JPNIN, a deputy director who was speaking there. So it was good. People had a lot to voice out. They had suggestions. They were not speaking surface language. They were saying there's some hardcore constitutional issues we need to handle, some attitude issues we need to handle. But that's the kind of spirit Malaysians are speaking now. Last night, Dr. Mutuma had a dinner discussion with Tan Sri Kosukun to try to also get into the cabinet ministry discussion on what's the problem of ratifying this covenant called the Racial Discrimination Covenant. It's been 40 over years around. Sadly enough, we are among 16 countries who have not signed. And the countries, well, I can't be terrible to say that the countries are not the best of company to be with, but you know what I mean, no? Sometimes you don't want to be in that position. You want to be amongst those people who are human rights thinkers. So that was the message we took this afternoon. He had a dialogue with the Deputy Speaker of Parliament and 9 parliamentarians, 4 from BN and 5 from Pakatan. So it was a good discussion, and the core issue was Article 153, and I think we need that space to discuss. I don't think we found the solution yet, no way, but we need the space to discuss. So that's a little bit of the background of where Dr. Mutuma in the last few days, and many of us have been part of it. And I think the rest of the evening, we leave it to all of you to add your own experience to this. Will that be okay? Yeah? I think toilets, the only thing about this hall is that we will know when you go to toilet because it's at the front. So sorry about that. I think the library toilet is closed, but it's on both sides, on both ends of. And I think there may be some water at the back. Is there some water? Yeah, there's some water at the back if you need water. So without any further wasting of any more precious minutes, because it's flying off at midnight. So we have squeezed every minute and ounce of Dr. Mutuma, but he's been very kind and gracious. So over to you, Dr. Mutuma.
Thank you very much, Jeron. And also let me begin by thanking the organizers of this very important discussion this evening. Also Farouk, my co-panelists, and all of you for making the time this evening to come so that we can have this discussion. As Jeron has stated, I am here on an unofficial visit. I think it's a complicated way of saying that, I'm still coming as a special rapporteur, but I'm not the special rapporteur. I don't know whether it makes sense, but I think that's the politically tactical way of putting it, that this is not a visit to examine progress about the country. It's really a visit largely to interact with people like yourselves, organizations, and also to learn more about Malaysia. In that respect, it's also good for me because it gives me the opportunity to speak not in official terms, but also to speak as an academic and someone who is interested in this very complicated issue of multiculturalism. And really the comments that I have, I don't have a paper, but just a number of comments are really meant to provoke discussion and dialogue with you rather than to state very authoritatively positions, official and otherwise, about multiculturalism. So I find the topic of the discussion this evening very, very timely and also quite provoking. Whether multiculturalism rhetoric is it a breeding ground for racism? And globally, the discussion about multiculturalism has gained a lot of prominence in the last 10 years or so, particularly quite pessimistic statements and views about multiculturalism. Indeed, particularly after September 11, the events of September 11, 2001, there are those who feel that multiculturalism is in crisis, and there are others actually who have stated that just like history is supposed to have come to an end, the era of multiculturalism has also come to an end. So there are a lot of reports of the death of multiculturalism in the world now. German Chancellor Angela Merkel very famously talked about the spectacular failure of multiculturalism in Germany, and therefore the need to go back to a more authentic forms of thinking about German society. And this has been echoed by many other leaders in Europe, in France, in UK, and commentators who feel there's actually a crisis confronting multicultural societies. Within the UN, the discussion about multiculturalism has a long history. The UN has often and always promoted the notion of multicultural societies. For many, many years, UNESCO, for instance, has spent a lot of paper and publications and discussions promoting the notion and the idea of multicultural societies. Within human rights also, the question of multiculturalism has been quite central. And in particular, the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, which is the culmination document after the 2001 World Conference on Racism endorsed the notion of multiculturalism. And indeed, the Durban Declaration talked of an affirmation that says, affirm the great importance we attach to the values of solidarity, respect, tolerance, and multiculturalism, which constitute the moral ground and inspiration of our worldwide struggle against racism, racial discrimination, and xenophobia. So the consensus coming out of the Durban conference was that we needed to promote multiculturalism as a way of confronting and combating racism. In my last report to the Human Rights Council in June of this year, I have also made a reference to the question of multiculturalism, and in particular noted that in spite or notwithstanding the diversity of views with regard to multiculturalism, it is crucial that cultural diversity is not denied or suppressed through coercive assimilationist policies and measures. So within the UN practice and discussions around human rights, multiculturalism is very much considered a central value of combating racism and promoting diversity and tolerance within societies. However, in thinking beyond the UN and looking at discussions both in newspapers but in classrooms and in other public forums, it is clear that multiculturalism is facing challenges both from the left and the right. It is not only one type of political group that is challenging the value of multiculturalism. And I think for many years, the left was quite uncomfortable with the idea of multiculturalism, which they found as basically an escapist retreat into culture, into a notion of culture, instead of confronting the very material basis of arguments for difference. And for the right, in many parts of the world, and more so in Europe at the moment, multiculturalism is being challenged on the basis that it is a fantasy that has made the society much more insecure, particularly in the context of post-September 11 world. And therefore, there's need to go to a more unashamed and unapologetic thinking about the value, and no one has used this term yet in respectable circles, but largely unspoken, the superiority, at least in human rights terms, of certain values that needs to be promoted over others. So basically, multiculturalism is facing a lot of challenges, and part of these challenges also have to do with the very fluidity of the term itself, the very ambiguity of the term itself. For multiculturalism has meant whatever people wanted it to mean. And that's part of the crisis of multiculturalism, if you wish. For some, it's just meant rejecting assimilationist policies of governments. For others, it has meant barely tolerating others. I may not like them, but I tolerate others. For others, it is meant government programs to promote certain cultures. So in reality, there is a problem with the way we have understood multiculturalism, and I think in promoting a discussion like this, we need to acknowledge part of the problem is also specifically the way multiculturalism has been understood by different people. I think for those who are interested in human rights and those working from a human rights point of view, multiculturalism becomes a problem when it becomes a safe space for a very facile celebration of difference without questioning the power relations, the underlying power relations in the society itself. The fact that multiculturalism became such a safe concept, such as safe and safely acceptable discussions, that did not mean posing questions about power, I think from a human rights point of view is part of the problem. So if we are thinking of of giving fresh meaning to this concept of multiculturalism from a human rights point of view, we cannot run away from questions of power. I think also for those of us working on human rights, it's important to remember that really power is at the center, and our understandings of power are at the center of why the language of human rights itself was invented. Because human rights, after all, is nothing but the vocabulary of trying to explain the brutal realities that we see in our world. It's basically the language of critiquing power distribution within the society. So human rights, in my view, although I must say within human rights circles we have made it a very safe subject, it's not a very safe subject. In fact, human rights essentially is essentially subversive of power. We must think of human rights as subversive of power. It's a way, it's the tools that we put in the hands of the weaker so that they can dismantle the power privileges of the powerful in the society. So if we start thinking of human rights from this perspective, then we are able to bring a new understanding to the notion of multiculturalism. So in a multicultural society, therefore, I think in looking at multicultural society from a human rights point of view, we must abandon the notion of a post-racial society. It is tempting to look at societies, and particularly after the election of Barack Obama as president in places like the US, and see and proclaim that we have reached a post-multicultural world, we have reached a post-racial world, and race is no longer an important issue in this kind of world. I think that's part of what is at the root of the crisis of multiculturalism itself, because it robs multiculturalism of the tools of critiquing the power relations. Now, in those societies where you have governance through culture, and in many places we have governance through culture, we have power, in other words, flowing through understandings of culture, and that's what I'm trying to mean by governance through culture. In these multicultural societies, we therefore have to think about the notion of power. In other words, in thinking about multicultural societies, we must abandon the depoliticization of the very concept of culture itself. The problem for multiculturalism is not that it encourages racism, in my view, but the fact that it allows for silence about racism to continue. I think that's part of the problem with the notion of multiculturalism as we understand it at the moment. And therefore the challenge for those who are thinking about multicultural societies in the current societies is to pay attention to how power is distributed using the lenses of culture. In other words, are there people who are gaining advantages of others on the basis of cultural claims? And I know in this country there's a robust debate that is going on, particularly with regard to certain measures that allocate certain goods or advantages to certain sections of the society. But I think these are questions we cannot avoid as people working in the field of human rights. They might be uncomfortable questions. In fact, it might be no longer a comfortable or respectable thing to bring up the question of race, particularly in our current world where we want to feel that racism is over. But the problem with that kind of retreat from confronting discussions of race is that it reinforces the advantage of the most powerful. And I think this is really the lesson we have learned from the struggles by the women's rights movements, for instance. That if we do not speak about we do not end the silence in those, in even private places, then you end up exposing individuals to violations and vulnerabilities in those spaces. So my argument is that we need to confront the issue of multiculturalism, not by simply rejecting it, not by looking at it as purely celebrating diversity, but also posing questions on how power is distributed in the society. I think it's also important to remember that thinking about culture and about communities, about societies from a human rights point of view does not reject the fact that there are some groups who we may need to help. And I know that's a huge discussion in this country, this multicultural society. Indeed, it is part of human rights thinking that there might be communities that have been so disadvantaged historically that we have to do something about their condition as part of fulfilling the human rights promise. So I don't think there's a question about that. I think the interesting and important questions for those who are confronted by such contexts is to ask themselves, who else might be facing similar problems within the society? And how do we manage diversity? How do we manage these mechanisms so that they do not harm other equally vulnerable sectors of the society? In other words, I think we need to think of human beings, which is the approach of human rights, as an end unto themselves. That that it is not acceptable to take away some rights or to disadvantage some individuals so as to improve the conditions of other individuals. This is at the core of human rights thinking. And I don't think it's in conflict with any of the measures that states have to take so as to ensure that they lift up different populations that might find themselves disadvantaged. I am also aware that discussions about cultural pluralism, about multiculturalism, about racism in societies also tend to be uncomfortable discussions because all of us are worried about the problems of conflict. Harmony is a social good, and we need to value that when we are talking about multiculturalism and when we are talking about human rights. But I also think that we need to remember that social harmony and peace is actually at the core of human rights thinking. That in fact, the preamble to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the preamble to the Charter of the United Nations make these statements quite clearly that the best way to avoid conflict is actually to protect human rights. So in other words, we need to see human rights as part of promotion of human rights, of social harmony and social peace. And really to end, I just want to point out that we need to remember that the reason that racism, the reason that discrimination on the basis of culture or ethnicity or national origin or race persists is because we have not given serious effort to understanding the challenge and the interconnectedness between the idea of race or ethnicity and the institutions of the state, of the modern nation state as constructed. That is the challenge for human rights, for those who are interested in human rights, to look at the interconnections, to look at how power is constructed in institutions in modern states using the lenses and the tools of culture, of race, and of ethnic origin. I think this is the task for human rights. It is not just to recite the provisions of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but to undertake a critique of power distribution and see who is being left out in this distribution of power. In other words, who is at the table and who is not at the table. This is really very stripped of all the legalese, stripped of all the philosophizing is what human rights is all about. And in a multicultural state, it is much more difficult, but I think it's an inescapable responsibility of both citizens and the states. And so with those few statements, I said I'm going to make a few statements, not present a paper. I thank you very much, and I look forward to a robust discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mutuma. I think he's put a few points that speak directly to Malaysia. I think if you make the connection with our history of power relations and the surface of rhetoric of we are Malaysia truly Asia, so we need to now go a bit deeper, and then I think that challenge is our work to do, you know, whether the questions of power relations and using the human rights framework as a way to analyze that relations in terms of ethnicity, race or history, I think will be an important challenge. So I leave that with you later when you take the floor. And now we have Dr. Farouk, who's going to give us, I'm sure, some radical ideas to go forward with. Yeah. So over to you, Dr. Farouk.
Thank you, Gerard. Dr. Mutuma and ladies and gentlemen, I think it's quite an urgent and important topic to us to discuss about multiculturalism rhetorics. Because basically, you know, everybody talks about multiculturalism, and especially the government of Malaysia. And as you correctly pointed out just now, we, Malaysia, we hold a chair at the Human Rights Council, right? But unfortunately, we have no respect for human rights. That's the problem with what we're facing right now, right? I would veer slightly away from multiculturalism just for a while and try and raise this issue because it's very important when you have a UN rapporteur over here. That, for example, the case of Hamza Kashgari. You have heard of the case of Hamza Kashgari? Hamza Kashgari was deported back to Saudi Arabia. Yeah, all right. So he was on his way to New Zealand and stopped over in Malaysia. And we have his lawyer over here who tried to get in touch with him, but was prevented to see him and was deported back to Saudi Arabia, even though we don't have any extradition treaty with Saudi Arabia. And because of what? Because he receives a phone call from the prince over there that, you know, that you have to send him back. We don't have any respect for human rights. You know, for a person who's seeking asylum in New Zealand, just in transit to go there. And yet we talk about, you know, we hold a chair at human rights and we are deporting someone to a country which has no extradition treaty with us. So I think that's a very sad case in Malaysia. And I think you have to know about it as a United Nations Special Rapporteur. I think you have to voice this out about the problem with our country. And as Gerard said that, you know, we talk about Malaysia to Asia, and as Dr. Mutuma correctly pointed out, that, you know, people have argued that multiculturalism is dead, right? So you said that, you know, with what happened in 9/11, people started to question whether multiculturalism is still alive or not. But the worst thing that happened recently was none other than the Andrei Breivik case in Finland. Yeah, I think that case actually really was a real challenge. Whether multiculturalism really works in our society nowadays, especially in Europe, and you know, whether it breeds a kind of ultra-nationalist identity, and I guess that's a challenge that we're facing nowadays. And we saw, like, if I'm not mistaken, the last World Cup, was it 2010? Listen, 2010 South Africa. Germany sent a very an example of a multicultural team, you know, with people from North Africa, from Turkey, and everything into one German squad, and they won very well. They won against England, in fact, right? And it was a real show of what multiculturalism is all about. But 3 months after that, the Chancellor said something that you mentioned just now. Right? So something must be very wrong. Just at World Cup, you are showing that multiculturalism works very well, and you have a multicultural squad at the World Cup, and 3 months after that, everything goes to ashes. So let me just go to a few things that I think that a few things that for me, as like you, I embrace multiculturalism, and I think it still works and it needs to work, and why we have to understand some of the points why it should be embraced. Okay, and I just listed out 5 points, and we'll go to those points one by one. First, I would like to define what is this multiculturalism, because it means a variety of things and kind of a nebulous terms and concept. And I would simply define it as the preservation of a culture distinct from that of the majority of the population. And that is choosing to exist within a community with similar values and making deliberate decisions to identify yourselves with the community in ways that set ourselves apart from others in our country. So it means that we keep faith to our own identity, even though we are a minority in the country. And supporting multiculturalism in principle is probably better than integration. Then there's always a debate whether you should integrate or should should embrace multiculturalism. And this debate is ongoing, right? It would support policies that would enable a multicultural rather than integrated society to function. What are the points for it? I think that first of all is that cultural heritage is very important. And if you look at the Malaysia context, then you see that we have various races. In our peninsula, we have a majority Malays, Chinese, and Indians, and Sikhs, and a few other races, the Javanese, and a few Thais, in northern part of Malaysia. And of course, in the east of Malaysia, we have multitude of races. I cannot name them, okay, because I think I lost count of them. You're good at it, Jared. So we should not penalize people just simply because they do not conform to the mainstream culture of a certain country. I think that's very important, okay? Because, for example, the Chinese, they have their own culture. The Indians have their own culture. Why should we penalize them? No, we should be able to embrace their culture, and we should not have, I believe, we should not have one national culture. And we say that what you mentioned just now about, the power distribution and who holds the power. Now that with the current government whatsoever, they're trying to promote Malay supremacy agenda, which is probably just slightly less than Ku Klux Klan. And with that agenda, they're trying to turn everyone to become Malays, right? So we have, even in schools nowadays, on certain occasions, like Awal Muharram, or not Awal Muharram, this Maulid Rasul, and everybody has to wear songkok and, baju Melayu, these Malay attires, and so on and so forth. Of course, in sekolah kebangsaan, not in all schools, but these are the terms that creep into Malaysian society nowadays. We try to integrate everyone and try to say that this is one Malaysia concept. It rings hollow to me. It doesn't make sense. And point number 2 is that this assimilation expects certain groups to shed their cultural heritage to adopt those of the host country. This, to me, is unrealistic. If a land is built on democratic difference, then very different political groups can and do exist. And secondly, assimilation will have a difficult time where Malay supremacy will prevail and deny human rights to all citizens. No? Because of this Malay supremacy agenda, we're trying to say that, if you have to embrace only one religion, like the recent fiasco, Dr. KJ John knows about this issue, and I think everybody knows about this Nurul Izzah statement that, there is no compulsion in religion, because the Quran says specifically in chapter 2, verse 256, La ikraha fi din. There shall be no coercion in matters of faith. What does it mean? It means that you cannot enforce, or you cannot force other people to join Islam, as much as you cannot prevent a Muslim from living the faith of Islam if a person doesn't have faith. And that was what was trying to be explained by Nurul Izzah, which was being spinned by the mainstream media to say that she advocates apostasy, which was, I think it was not what she meant, right? What she really meant was these human rights, We have right to believe, and that's the most important thing. I mean, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it was stated clearly that one embraces a religion that one have beliefs in, and one can leave the faith of religion which one doesn't believe anymore. And that's the fundamental of human rights, and that is Islam. And people say that why human rights is against Islam is because of this clause. These particular clause out of all the, how many clauses? 29? 30, yeah. Of all the 30, this is the main paramount clause that is considered to be against the Islamic tenet. That is, you can embrace and you can leave the faith, which people in Malaysia cannot accept. The Malays, because it has something to do with our constitution as well, because we define Malay as someone who speaks Malay, who lives with Malay culture and embraces Islam. And there's a problem there, when you define race with religion. Somebody told me, I don't know whether it's true or not, there are only 2 nations in the world that have these similarities. One is Malaysia, second is Bosnia. I don't know whether it's true or not, Maybe you can tell us because you are from United Nations. Then, but that's the thing, we are having this problem over here, right? The respect for human rights is not there. So when we talk, especially especially a person like me, who is from what they call, we have our Islamic group, so-called with an Islamic name, and then started to talk about human rights, they said, these people worship human rights. They don't worship God. So that's the problem that we have nowadays. Yeah? The problem with our understanding of this issue. Okay, point number 3. Point number 3 to me is that by embracing multiculturalism, we allow people to preserve their own cultures and allow other people to understand different cultural practices and ways of living life. This exposure enriches the cultural practices of all. We are better able to make choices about the way in which we wish to live our lives, the type of food we eat, or what religion we practice. And that is very important, because we are not coerced. Well, I'm not trying to change Gerard to become a Malay like me, so that every morning he has to eat nasi lemak or something like that, right? Nasi lemak. Okay, so he can eat whatever he likes, right? He prefers roti canai, I know, right? So, you have to live, with your own conviction, not because of the pressure that you have from the majority of the community of a certain country. Okay, and point number 4 is that it can be argued that neither the state nor the majority of host community has a monopoly on the knowledge of the best way to live life. As such, we each have to seek out this good life for ourselves. It varies depending on our individual values and priorities. We have to determine ourselves, right? And the last point is that it allows a greater choice between ways of living rather than everyone being integrated into a way of life that varies very little. Even if some ways of life are actively harmful, the law exists to protect us against such excesses. So for example, like polygamy in America, I think it was disallowed, right, in all the 50 states. But in some states where they have these Mormons, I mean, I think if I'm not mistaken, 2 states, Utah and I couldn't remember which was the other one. You know, it was allowed, right? So we can still negotiate these excesses, right? It doesn't mean that you have to conform to something as a universal conformity. No, we can still negotiate with that. And I think that's the most important. These are some of the most important reasons why we have to embrace multiculturalism. I think I'll leave to the floor for any discussions on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Farouk. Yeah, I think that's very radical because I think that's going to create a lot of trouble in Malaysia because that's the kind of hope and vision we are thinking of. This is the kind of things we hope that we can live. What's the problem with difference? But you hardly hear a leader daring to speak what Dr. Farouk has said. Many people will agree with him privately, but on the public space you see, oh God, they're just repeating the same things, you know. That's the feeling I got when I was following Dr. Mutuma talking to so many leaders. I said, why are they not going to the core of the matter? You've just gone to the core and just unpacked it and said, this is it, no? Can Malaysia has a space for difference and we can manage it, no?